Hey, what's up? I'm Scott Ian, and you're watching Artisan News. Please check out my book, I'm the Man, the story of that guy from Anthrax. That's me. Check it out. I promise you, I guarantee you'll enjoy it. I started writing stuff down a couple of years ago because I was starting to forget things. I would find that my recall for just things in general wasn't like instant like it used to be. You know, it used to be I was like Google. Someone would ask me a question about something and it would be like right there, whether it was the most trivial information or whatever. But I just noticed a couple of years ago that stopped happening. I'd be like, wait a minute. And then like 3 days later, oh yeah. So I actually started writing down stories and ideas. And anytime something would pop in my head, I would make a note in my phone. And then when I would have time, I would like write out like let's say the Lemmy story or that's in the book, or I would like write it out, write out the whole thing like I was writing a book or something like that. And but mainly just so I wouldn't forget stuff. So I would have all this stuff. So 10 years from now, when I wouldn't be able to remember anything, I would have all this stuff written down already. And then out of that, I started doing those talking shows at the end of 2012. I did my first one. And then that really that stuff really started to kind of coalesce. And I was just having a lot of fun taking these kind of trips back in time in my brain. And that's when I realized I think a book was possible because up until that point, I always said no to doing a book. I'd been asked a bunch of times, and I just felt like everyone's doing a book. I don't, what am I going to, I don't care really. And a lot of it had to do with the workload. If I was going to take money to write a book, I would have to commit to doing the work. And I couldn't do that because I knew there's no way I'm getting this done. It'll take me 10 years to write a book. So at that point in time, I had a lot of the work done because I had already gone through this Rolodex in my brain and it already kind of revisited a lot of tales. And that's when I realized, there is a narrative here and it would make sense. And that's kind of how it all got off the ground.
Yeah, so it's almost like because like you said, you transferred that into the spoken word thing as well. So, I mean, there's the humorous slant. Part of the book is humorous, but part of it to me was terribly, insightful. So how did you parcel that out, and did you have to chisel away at different parts of it? Okay, I'm going to chisel this into the book and put this and put a spin on it for the spoken word.
No, because it was easy to just, I think, obviously the book doesn't start, from a book kind of starts here, goes around, but just being able to create a narrative and a structure that works, I don't think was that difficult, because the stories, a lot of the stories, the anecdotal, let's say, stories, chronologically, they just kind of all make sense once you get into the band part of my history, which is obviously a big part of the book. So, to have a beginning, a middle, and an end was important to me. I didn't want to have a book that was just going to be like 14 chapters. Each chapter is just a different story from a different time in my life. I really wanted it to have a proper narrative structure. So that was important to me. I wanted that. That's why, like with John and I, Wiederhorn, we would have these conversations about, well, where are we going to go? Like, how are we going to end it? And I think I remember saying, like, well, why don't we end it at Yankee Stadium? Because for me, that was like a real good cap. Because there's a lot more that's happened since the Yankee Stadium show, and most of it all really good. But that was kind of, for me, a really good way to cap it at the end, and then, of course, leave off for another book, hopefully, at some point. But just having a narrative was really important to me rather than just a bunch of anecdotes.
Yeah, yeah. And, obviously there's stuff in the media where Neil has come back and said that your book is like a bunch of fabricated stories. So how do you respond? Because, you are brutally honest sometimes in this book, and you're bound to get these people to come out of the woodwork. So, A, how do you respond to Neil? Did you expect people to?
I don't care. It's my book. I don't give a shit.
Yeah. So, in essence, with how much editing did you have to do? Because like I said, there are some good stories in there. Some people have called out, but were there anything that was edited out of the book that, for different reasons, you felt?
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that's like, um, once the lawyers get a hold of it, they, then they advise you because the lawyers have to read the book like 30 times to protect the author, really. The publisher's lawyers, they really kind of go through it. And then they come back to you with all their notes, and say, well, you might want to change this person's name. That's the big thing, like, is name changing, because that gets you at anything. You could say anything you want about somebody if you're not calling them by their real name. But obviously, that's not something I could do in the context of Anthrax because people know the guys' names, in the band, or people who have been in the band. But there are some other things in the book, people names that are in the book, and people that I talk about in the book where it isn't their actual names because it was going to leave myself, I think, I don't know, vulnerable. I don't really know. But it wasn't too much the case with my book because this isn't a shit like talking book. If anything, I talk shit about myself because I am so honest about stuff, and putting stuff on me. We're taking responsibility for when I was a dick. So it really wasn't too much of that. Really, it's kind of like they just tell you, well, you say this about this person. Why, if you say it like this, why maybe you could say it like this, and you're getting your point across, but it's taking the libel out of the sentence or something like that. And generally, I was pretty open to any changes they wanted to make, as long as it wasn't taking really the essence of what I wanted to say away. Because then, if all of a sudden your book is just a bunch of niceties and it takes all the balls out of it or the honesty out of it, then what's the point of writing a book? But I really didn't have that problem too much because, like I said, I'm not shit talking in my book. There's no shit talking. I don't need shit talking to write a book. I think there's enough interesting stuff that's happened in my life that that it's compelling enough without having to talk about other people.
Right. Was that a disappointing facet of doing this book that maybe you didn't realize that it would get to be so intensive with the legal process? This is an eye-opening thing for me. I didn't know.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't hard for me. Like I said, it makes me think about other people's books and what they must have gone through because I've read a lot of these rock books. Certainly, I mean, you could read any dude from Kiss's books. I've read all of their books, and there's a lot of shit talking in those books. I read Peter's book. There's a lot of talking in that book. And it's not like he's changing names or candy coating anything. And so I'm not quite sure, I guess it's just up to, the individual. And I did learn one thing. The lawyers told me that, when it comes to someone who's not in the public eye, like whether it's, let's say, an ex-wife or just someone who's not famous, in general, there's an expectation of privacy that those people have. So then if suddenly you're writing a book and you're basically outing somebody or talking about things that, are coming, whether or not it's true, but it's your perception of it. It could be absolutely the God's honest truth, but still it comes down to the argument of, well, that was your perception of it. And if someone who's not in the public eye, they do have an expectation of privacy that doesn't necessarily come into play as much when you're talking about someone who is in the public eye. So it's actually with people that aren't famous is where you have more of the issues, about you have to kind of watch what you're saying about them because, it's not your place to like suddenly out somebody for something that they never wanted anyone to know about,
Right. Exactly. So going through all the notes and going through the book, what was the biggest eye-opener that you had about yourself?
Just I really tried to go back and not necessarily just remember what happened and go like, okay, here's a story, here's something that happened in 1991, whatever year, just in general, but not just like kind of go back and remember, but I really tried to go back and think about who I was because, like I've said it so many times, I look at pictures of myself from the past and I have no connection. Like I could look at photos of myself from the 80s, 90s, and it's like, who is that guy? Because I don't ever sit and think about that. I don't sit and dwell on my past. I'm always moving forward. So now being in a situation for the first time where I am dwelling on my past and I'm really, like for the first time looking back on stuff. So I'm like, all right, so let's dig in. And for me, it was a case of who was I in, like, when I look at a photo from 1987, who was that Scott Ian? Like, how was I? How was I as a person? What was I thinking about? What were my motivations? Like, I try and put it in the context of who I am today and what do I think about and what motivates me on a daily basis. Well, who the hell was I back then too? And why did I make decisions that I made? And like specifically, I think the whole story about firing Joey, which for me, is obviously a real, that's a traumatic uh, part in the history of the band, certainly in the history of my life, personally and professionally. And I think I really, really kind of dug into that one just to find out, like, really, where was I coming from? And look, it wasn't just me. It's not like I said, we have to make this decision. It was me and Charlie and Frankie and Danny Spitz. We were all on the same page at the time. But I think for me, it was just so much more personal because I was writing the lyrics, and I had, Joey, up until that point, always was able to really kind of get across, as a guy who wasn't writing the lyrics, but fronting the band and singing my words really it was coming across the way I always imagined it should come across. And then we got into Persistence of Time, and it was just to get to the point of your question. I was going through and looking back on it. I mean, my second marriage was starting to fail already at that point. Like, actually, I wasn't even married yet to that who became my second wife, but I was going through a lot of issues personally in my relationship at the time. And so many of the lyrics I was writing on Persistence of Time had to do with that. And it just became this thing, like, where it wasn't working for me anymore. Like, I just felt like he's not selling it. The emotion isn't there. And I couldn't step up to the mic and sing. I'm not a singer. I'm a frustrated singer. If you want, I write the words, but I can't get in front the band. I can't do that. So I think that frustration just built and built and built over the fact that I felt like it's not working for me anymore. And I took that out on Joey. My frustrations, I think, in my personal life really ended up, because my personal life and the band are so intertwined anyway, but it really, I can't change what we did, obviously. I can't change the past, but it did make me think, what if we got past that, and what if we moved forward with Joey? Because he said to me over the last couple of years, I could have sang on Sound the White Noise. I could have made that record with Anthrax, and I was able to at that point say, you know what, you're right. You're right. But me, as that guy, that 27-year-old version of me, I couldn't see that. I only was able to see the fact at that point in time that this is not working anymore. And if I'm going to move forward, there has to be a change. And I think what you'll get from reading the book is, I think I really do kind of put it on me, because it was, it had nothing to do with Joey as a singer or Joey as a human being. It had to do with, I was a fucking miserable prick at that point in time.
Yeah. And it's funny, you mentioned that you're able to kind of sort of dissociate yourself now from how you were back then. So being that's how you sort of related to relate to your past, what does you of today tell Scotty and of old? What the fuck were you thinking? Which is the most what the fuck were you thinking moment now that you can look back?
I would definitely say, don't break into Legends Field. Don't do that. It's a great story to have in your pocket, but it cost me a lot of money. That would be the first thing. Don't break into Legends Field. And then the other thing would be to put your foot down in 1993 and tell Elektra that we're going with Room for One More as the second single, and we're not waiting for Black Lodge, because I think that's the biggest business decision we ever went wrong on, and we didn't go with our guts, and we listened to the label because we thought they knew what they were talking about, and it ended up killing the momentum of that record. Was a record that should have sold 2 million copies, and granted, it did good, but it didn't do what we all hoped it was going to do, and it's only because we didn't go with Room for One More as the second single and follow up only immediately with that, and it would have kept the ball rolling and it would have blown up. Instead, we sat around for 4 months with nothing, waiting to shoot a video for Black Lodge. And it's one of those things like, obviously you can't change the past, but it's such an obvious decision that we made the wrong decision at the time.
Yeah. And here's something I wanted to follow up on the spoken word. And has putting this book together changed the way the spoken word is going to appear in the future? Has that evolved? Have you taken stuff?
I don't know. I haven't really thought about it. I don't know. I don't know how the book affects the talking shows or vice versa, really. Obviously, with the book out and then a DVD coming of my talking show next month, obviously I'm going to need new material. Although some of my comedian friends tell me, look, people want to hear jokes over and over again, like almost like greatest hits. So you'll always be able to tell your dime bag story. Even if people see the DVD, you'll be able to tell it. So, but yeah, obviously I need more stories and more tales, and I do have a lot more than I've ever told in my talking shows or that are even in this book. So, you know,
And how do you gauge success with the book? I mean, is there? I'm just gonna leave it at that.
I don't know. It's my first time doing one. I know the publisher's very, very, all about, I guess, just like records, still people actually care about where a record charts on Billboard, which I don't know why anyone gives a shit about that anymore because it means nothing. Now, almost any record could go top 20 and they sell 20,000 copies, like, whereas to get top 20 back when it mattered, you had to sell a lot of records. To have a top 10 record, you had to sell like 200,000 copies, back then. So now 200,000, you'd be number one for a month. But I guess with the book, the New York Times bestseller list is a big deal if you make that in your first week or something. So that's what I've been told. But for me, I don't know. I mean, yeah, obviously I want it to sell. That's you gauge success if 33 people buy the book. I guess it didn't do well. But as far as I'm concerned, I think I wrote a really good book. I think I really tell a story. I think it moves really well. It's a really interesting and compelling read, regardless of anything about my band or who I am. I just think it's a really good human story.
And
Much like I could compare it to something like the Anvil movie, because a friend of mine made that movie, and I remember seeing it way before it was even out. And I said to him, you've really come up with something here. You don't have to know anything about this band or even like heavy metal to get the fact that this is just a really great story. And obviously it did really well. And I kind of feel the same about my book. It doesn't matter if you like heavy metal music or not. This is just a good story.
Yeah. And what is the best piece of feedback that you've gotten about the book from either friends or people close to you? What's been the most negative?
People seem to be really surprised at like actually how honest I've been about stuff about myself, But I felt like if I'm gonna tell a story, I have to be honest about myself. Otherwise, what's the point? To me, the most interesting art in general, whether it's music, film, TV, paintings, is honesty, and it's getting to see really the truth about somebody. And I think I wasn't afraid to, warts and all, tell the truth about myself in the book.
Yeah. And with that being said, you talk about the flow of the book, like works really well. How much detail did you give to that, and which is your favorite portion of the book?
Favorite portion of the book. Wow, that's hard to say. Which is my favorite portion? I don't know. Maybe the early stuff of trying to make our first record, just getting to that point. Because still for me, if I think back about my whole career in the band, that still to me is, when people ask about high points, and there's a lot of obvious things like Yankee Stadium or Madison Square Garden or whatever, but getting to make a first record, it's still so amazing to me that we were able to do that. Even writing it out, writing the story out from that point in time, from, you know, July 18th, 1981, the first ever jam session, which became Anthrax, to recording Fistful of Metal. You know, those 3 years basically. It was I was like July. Well, actually, from July '81 till we were actually in the studio, which was fall of '83. So those 2 years of trying to get to that point, it's just amazing to me that it actually happened. You know, trying to get someone outside of the dudes in the band and maybe some of your friends to actually pay attention to you and care about what you're doing and have the same passion that you have for these songs that you're writing. And you're a kid. That's fucking, you know, in 1981, I was 17 years old when this thing started. So it's amazing to me that 2 years after we started our band, we were up in Ithaca, New York, recording an album. How that happened, I know all the, technically all the, how it happened and what we were doing, but just the fact that it did. How the fuck did we pull that off? Johnny Z, I talk a lot about those days. And look, if it wasn't for Johnny, maybe it never happens. I got to give Johnny Z all the credit that is due to him, because, if it's not for him, between us and, us and Metallica, he's the man that made that happen, brought Metallica to New York and put Anthrax in the studio. So, without him, it's a different. My world is completely different.
Yeah, and I'm looking at it, and I used to play music, and used to play. I lived in Bayside for a while, and so I'm, as I'm reading the book, for a while, I'm like right there with you. So I think you put a great perspective on what it means to be in the industry, because I went to the other end of the industry, reporting on it, where I could have easily gone that route.
Mm-hmm.
So I just thought it was fascinating the way that you navigated through those waters. So I'm just wondering, as you were doing it, was it something like a spontaneous thing, you just, like you said, on to the next moment, or how much of the kid in you was exposed during this whole process of moving up through the 80s?
We just worked, man. We were just always working for the next thing, always just trying to have something to do. Like back, before we were anything, we rehearsed 5 nights a week at the music building, trying to write songs and rehearsing. And anytime we had enough money to go in and make a new demo, we would go to a studio and cut demos. And it was just always a case of what's next. Just trying to always be a working band. That's the best way. Because we couldn't really play shows. Nobody was booking a band like us back then. They were only booking cover bands, And even when Metallica came to New York and we played a whole bunch of shows around New York, New Jersey, in early '83, it's not like those shows were packed. But it was just a case of working. That's always been my attitude. If we're a blue collar band, that's what we are. That's what we do. We work. We write songs. We make records. We go out and we play shows, and then we do it again and we do it again. And even back then, before we were nobody, that's all we were trying to do. Even if in reality we weren't doing it, but that's where our heads were at. So that's why we'd be in the room 5 nights a week, for hours and hours and hours every night, just trying to make ourselves better. And it was just a case of working all the time. That's what it was and still is for me, is just working all the time. Now to just obviously maintain it.
Yeah. And you guys were the band that brought me to the next level of consciousness as far as music is concerned, because you had these political undertones, and I'm just wondering if, as you guys were doing it, were you realizing that you were kind of changing the fundamental way that people are viewing music?
No, we had no idea. No, when you're in it, you're so deep in it, we don't know. Years later, when people tell you about you're the big four, we didn't, none of us were thinking about that. We weren't really thinking about, some of the only actual, thought about decisions were, yes, when when Neil was out of the band, we made a decision to not dress the way we dressed when he was still in the band. The leather pants got put in the trunk in the attic, and we just wore our shorts that we wore all day long because that's what made sense to us. Like, why am I going to take off my comfortable shorts and sneakers and then go on stage in like tight leather pants and chainmail belts that weigh me down when I just want to jump around like a lunatic? I just need to be in my shorts. So yes, that was like something we decided, and we said, yeah, we don't need to look like Judas Priest. There already is a Judas Priest. We just want to look like ourselves. That's who we are. That's something we felt very strongly about back then in the early days, that we are the same people as the people coming to see us. We're those same kids. We just happen to be in a band, and we play our instruments and we're writing songs. But back in 1985, when we were playing L'Amour's, we were the same as the kids in the crowd. Like, that's who we were. That's exactly who we were. So why would we change the way we look? I always felt really strongly about that. For me, as much as I loved Kiss, obviously, growing up, I identified with the Ramones just as much because the Ramones were the Ramones. That's who they were. I wore Levi's and a leather jacket my whole life growing up as a kid. Like, why wouldn't I just wear that on stage? Or if I'm wearing shorts all day long, why wouldn't I just wear that on stage? Why do I have to change my look to be in a band? That's something I never was comfortable with.
And we're talking about the process of making the book, and so I wanted to find the give and take with Mr. Wiederhorn and how that worked. Were did it flow easily? What was that process like?
Like I said earlier, I had a lot of stories written out already, so I sent him all these things that I had already written. Basically, I sent him all my material, as well as he came out to LA, spent like a week at my house, and we just got drunk, and he would let the recorder go, and I would talk for 7 hours, and basically just we would just get in the topics, and then off of those topics, other tangents, and then it was a case of just putting it all together so it made narrative sense. So we had like this wealth of material, and then it was just like, okay, now let's kind of let's create the path on how it's going to work.
Was there a give and take? Like, how headstrong were you as it's got to be like this, and then you've got John's idea, and then maybe even the book publisher. So how did you kind of?
As far as that goes, it's all me. Like, it's definitely me. It's my book, and bottom line was anything that was going to be in that book was definitely going to be my voice, and it's going to be the way I want it. But there was never anything like, it's not like John would write something and I'd be like, that didn't happen, or that's not the way. It was never really like that. If once in a while there might be a factual, thing like a date or something like that would be wrong, that would get corrected. But because of the talking shows, I think I got really good at telling stories the way you would just write it. Because to me, telling a story is better for me. I would rather hear someone tell a story, personally. And I think I got really good at telling stories from doing my shows. So I think, in a sense, that also made the work easier because I'm telling the stories the way I already want them to be heard. So it just, that's how it is in the book, basically.
And circling back to the very beginning of the interview, when we talked about it all started with you wanting to chronicle, do you think that you achieved that goal? Do you think that this book is it for you to kind of remember?
Oh yeah, I mean, yes, there is. I was talking on the cab on the way here, like already thinking, like, the stuff that we left out because it didn't work in the narrative that we have. But yeah, it definitely, I think it definitely tells the tale. Like I said, I think it's just a really great human story, but it's a human story of someone who did something that a lot of people aspire to do in their lives. I mean, my mother said it to me. I think it's in the book. Who are you? Who are you to think that you're going to make it in a band? 1 million people want to be in a band. Who are you to think that it's going to happen? And I'm like, I don't know that it's going to happen, but I'm going to fucking try. And I think that's what this book is about, is just never giving up on what you want to do with your life.
And last question, do you think, and I had a similar situation when my kids were born where I started to lose some of my memories of back then. Do you think that was when, because your focus now is totally different.
Dude, you can't know until you have a child. But yeah, it takes, It takes your whole world, everything. I mean, granted, it should. If your priorities don't change, you shouldn't have a child. So if it doesn't become the focus of your world, especially in those, when it's just a helpless infant, yeah, it eats so much of your brain. My wife even more so, like for her. But yeah, it so much. I think your brain, you have X amount of room in there, like a hard drive. So you know what I mean? It's like, and then all of a sudden, here's your son, and that's basically okay. That's 99.9% of my brain now. So yeah, a little trivial information was just kind of getting thrown to the wayside, and that's where I realized I got to start writing some crap down now. Otherwise, I'm not going to remember anything in a few years.